"I wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone," he told investigators, without blinking. No rage, no remorse, just curiosity. In a quiet New England town where nothing ever happens, 4 teenagers shattered that illusion in a single night. The question is, how did it get this far, and why did no one see it coming? A sharp, metallic sound cut through the stillness. Then, a dull thud, followed by a gurgling gasp, and silence. In the dim bedroom, lit only by the faint glow of a street lamp bleeding through the curtains, blood seeped slowly across pale sheets. It gathered in dark pools on the floor, thick and glistening. The scent of iron filled the air, heavy, suffocating. The room, moments before a place of warmth and sleep, now reeked of fear and death. The woman lay sprawled across the bed, her eyes wide open, fixed on nothing. A jagged wound across her throat exposed pale muscle beneath torn skin. Blood trailed from her lips, down her neck, soaking her nightgown. Beside her, a small figure trembled beneath the covers. A girl, barely 11. Her breaths came in rapid, shallow bursts, so faint they might have gone unnoticed. Somewhere downstairs, a floorboard creaked. It is a scene etched into the memory of every officer who entered that house on Trow Road. No one expected such horror in Mont Vernon, a small, picturesque town where crime was almost non-existent. Residents left their doors unlocked. Neighbors knew each other by name. It was a place where children rode their bikes freely, where darkness held no threat, until that night. Violence of this nature rarely erupts from nowhere. It brews, it festers, often in the minds of those who feel unseen, unheard. Christopher Gribble was such a man. On the surface, his life seemed ordinary. A former Boy Scout, raised in a strict religious household, homeschooled by well-meaning parents. But beneath this veneer, he harbored dark fantasies that had long since twisted into urges. Stephen Spader, younger by 2 years, was different. His chaos was visible. A troubled boy, known for outbursts, fascination with death, and an insatiable need to feel powerful. When these two met again in 2009, their respective disorders converged into something far more dangerous than either could have become alone. Together, they created a group, a name: Disciples of Destruction. It sounds childish, almost laughable, until you understand the purpose behind it. The name gave their desires legitimacy, a shared identity. In criminology, this is a classic pattern. Isolated individuals find each other, validate each other's darkness, and escalate. What was once a thought, a fantasy, becomes a plan. In their twisted logic, killing was not about hate, not even about gain. It was about the experience, to know what it felt like to end a life, to taste power. They drove into Mont Vernon under the cover of night. The house was chosen at random. That randomness, that is what makes crimes like this so terrifying. No connection, no warning. Anyone could have been inside that home. But it was Kimberly Cates, a nurse, a beloved mother, and her daughter, Jaimie. The group prepared meticulously. Spare clothes, gloves, weapons. Stephen brought a machete sharpened to a brutal edge. Christopher chose a hunting knife, its blade gleaming in the dark. The others, Quinn Glover and Billy Marks, followed. Whether out of fear or fascination, that remains debated. What is clear is this: by the time they reached Trow Road, the decision had been made. There would be no mercy. If anyone was home, they would die. They cut the power first. A calculated move. It plunged the house into silence, masking their movements. The basement window was their entry point, a small pane, easily shattered. One by one, they slipped inside, shadows moving through the darkness. Upstairs, the family slept. The attackers crept through the hall, each step deliberate. Hearts pounding, though not from fear, from anticipation. The bedroom door stood ajar. Light from the street outside traced a faint line across the floor. Inside, Kimberly and Jaimie lay side by side, unaware of the nightmare approaching. Stephen struck first. The machete arced down, splitting flesh and bone. Kimberly woke with a scream, cut short by the next blow. Blood sprayed across the walls, the bed, the child beside her. Christopher followed, his blade seeking soft targets, methodical, detached. Jaimie instinctively went still. Covered in her mother's blood, she slowed her breath, feigned death, a survival instinct as primal as the violence around her. What followed was not a frenzy, but a ritual. Blow after blow, long past the point of necessity. In forensic terms, this is overkill, indicative of deep-seated rage, or in this case, a perverse desire to savor the act, to feel the power of life extinguished beneath their hands. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. They took trinkets, jewelry, an iPod, not because they needed them, but to mark the moment, to carry a piece of the crime with them. A chilling form of trophy-taking, common among thrill killers. Downstairs, they changed clothes, cleaned their blades, and slipped away into the night, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. Yet, one life remained. The call came through at 4:15 in the morning. The dispatcher barely understood the voice on the other end. Small, broken, no more than a whisper, but the words were unmistakable. Someone had hurt them. Someone had hurt her mother. There was no time to hesitate. Officers were dispatched immediately. What they found when they arrived would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The front door was locked, the house silent. But through a kitchen window, an officer spotted movement. A small figure, barely visible behind the counter, drenched in blood. They forced entry. What greeted them inside was beyond comprehension. Blood coated the floors, smeared along the walls. In the master bedroom, the scene was worse, much worse. Kimberly Cates lay on the bed, her body mutilated beyond recognition. A brutality that spoke not of necessity, but of desire, a compulsion. And then, amid the devastation, they found Jaimie, barely alive. Her foot nearly severed, her body covered in wounds, but conscious, aware. It was her voice they had heard, her call that had brought them here. Later, forensic teams would meticulously document the scene, every drop of blood, every imprint. The evidence told a story of premeditation and of pleasure taken in the act. This was not a burglary gone wrong, not a panic-driven killing. It was something far colder. At the same time, word began to spread through Mont Vernon. The unthinkable had happened. In their town, in that house. It is important to understand that crimes of this nature do not exist in a vacuum. They are the product of a process. A slow erosion of empathy, a building of fantasy. Christopher Gribble had fantasized about killing for years. He had told counselors of his thoughts, detailed them. Desires to hear screams, to watch life leave another human being. He knew it was wrong. Yet the thought thrilled him. Stephen Spader, too, had long been fascinated with murder. He idolized killers, consumed stories of violence, boasted that he would do it himself one day. And when they found each other, those dark fantasies fed upon one another, reinforced, encouraged, until the line between thought and action disappeared. In criminology, this is often called a co-offending dynamic. Two individuals whose combined pathology becomes more dangerous than either alone. One provides the planning, the justification, the other, the will to act. Together, they constructed a narrative. They were not just killers. They were soldiers of destruction. Their name gave them purpose, an identity to shield the enormity of what they were about to do. As dawn broke over Mont Vernon, that identity was already crumbling. The girl had survived. The scene had been discovered, and investigators were closing in. What followed would be a chilling unraveling of lies, of loyalties, of minds so deeply immersed in darkness they could no longer tell where fantasy ended and reality began. Morning came slowly to Mont Vernon that day. A gray light spread across the streets, thin and cold, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over what had happened. Police vehicles lined Trow Road, their lights flashing silently, casting long, flickering shadows across the wet pavement. Reporters had not yet arrived. Only a few neighbors, drawn by instinct more than curiosity, stood at a distance, watching, waiting. Inside the house, the investigators worked in near silence. Cameras clicked softly. Markers were placed beside blood patterns, beside broken glass, beside the scattered remnants of what had once been a family's safe space. The scent of bleach mingled with the coppery tang of dried blood. The air hung heavy. No one spoke unless necessary. At the hospital, Jaimie fought to stay awake, her body broken, her mind fragmented. Yet when asked, when gently prompted, she spoke. Not everything, not at first, but enough. A man with a knife, another with a machete, a bald head, a voice that had said, "Get the jewelry." Words burned into her memory. It was enough to start a trail, enough to give the investigators direction. Word spread quickly through nearby towns. Rumors surfaced, among them a chilling one, that a pair of young men in Brookline had been overheard boasting about killing a mother and daughter. At first, those who heard it thought it was bravado, an ugly joke. But after the news from Mont Vernon broke, the laughter stopped. The horror of it began to settle in. The names surfaced soon after. Stephen Spader, Christopher Gribble, both known to local law enforcement, though never for anything this unimaginable. They were not hardened criminals. They were boys, barely out of school. Yet, even in those early hours, the investigators sensed something far deeper, something colder. When brought in for questioning, Stephen sat almost casually. His demeanor was not that of someone caught in fear. There was no trembling, no tears. He seemed detached, almost amused. At times he smiled. At others, he stared blankly at the wall, lost in some private thought. Christopher, too, displayed little visible emotion. His answers were deliberate, calculated. At one point, when asked about the night, he admitted quietly, "I had wanted to kill someone for a long time. It seemed like a good time to do it." There was no remorse in his voice, no hesitation, only a strange sense of relief, as though the act had released something long held inside him. As the interrogations unfolded, the story emerged, piece by piece. The planning, the formation of their so-called brotherhood, the selection of a random house, the drive, the weapons, the cold decision that if anyone was home, they would die. And throughout it all, one question lingered. Why? What had driven these young men to such depths of cruelty? The answer, as is often the case, lay in the dark corners of their minds. Stephen, by his own admission, had long fantasized about killing. He craved the feeling of power, of control. Christopher, similarly, had nurtured violent fantasies for years. The two had found each other at just the right, or rather the wrong moment. Together, they created an echo chamber, feeding each other's darkest desires until fantasy became inevitability. Their behavior after the crime reinforced this. They did not flee in panic. They cleaned up, changed clothes, even attempted to pawn stolen jewelry. They boasted to friends, laughed, described the scene in graphic detail. It was as if they wanted the world to know, to be seen for what they had done. But they had underestimated one thing: the resilience of a child. Jaimie's survival had shattered their illusion of control. Through her voice, the truth emerged. Through her courage, justice began to take shape. And now, as the pieces were gathered, as the evidence mounted, the question shifted. Not just why they had done it, but how such darkness could grow so quietly, in plain sight, among familiar faces, in a quiet town, in a world that had believed it could never happen here. The days that followed were heavy with unease, even as the arrests were made, even as names and faces filled the news. There was a lingering disbelief that clung to the town and beyond. How could boys, so young, so seemingly ordinary, carry out such horror, and then speak of it so freely? Inside the interrogation rooms, more layers began to peel away. Under quiet pressure, under the weight of mounting evidence, their words shifted, from denial to half-truths to dark confessions. Yet, even in confession, there was something deeply unsettling. The lack of remorse was palpable. Stephen, when asked about the night, recounted it with a disturbing detachment. He spoke of the machete, of how it felt in his hands, of the power he felt with each strike. His words were clear, deliberate, as though describing a scene from a movie. Not one he had created, not one he had lived. Christopher was no different. He spoke of his knife, of the precision with which he had used it. He admitted that he had long imagined what it would be like, and that now, having done it, he felt almost calm. This is a critical point. In cases like these, what we see is not impulsive rage, not a loss of control, but rather a calculated pursuit, a fulfillment of long-nurtured fantasy. In forensic psychology, such behavior aligns closely with psychopathic traits: the planning, the emotional coldness, the absence of empathy, the pleasure derived from the suffering of others. Yet there was another layer, the group dynamic, the so-called brotherhood, disciples of destruction. For individuals like Stephen and Christopher, creating a group, giving their actions a name, provided a distorted sense of purpose. It masked personal responsibility beneath a shared identity, a pattern not uncommon in thrill killings involving young offenders. The creation of an alternate moral code, one that permits, even celebrates, the unthinkable. The others in the group, Quinn and Billy, presented a different psychological profile, more followers than leaders, drawn in by the charisma, the false bravado of Stephen, caught in a spiral of peer influence and moral disengagement. Their roles, though secondary, remain deeply troubling. For even as witnesses, even as reluctant participants, they did not stop it. They did not leave. They stayed. And after, they spoke of it, joked about it, in the company of others, perhaps to mask guilt, perhaps to reinforce their place within the group, or perhaps because some part of them, too, had crossed a line they could no longer see. Meanwhile, Jaimie fought to recover. Her physical wounds were severe, but the deeper wounds, those left unseen, would take much longer to heal. Trauma of this magnitude imprints deeply. The survival instinct that had saved her life, the frozen moment beneath blood-soaked sheets, would replay in her mind again and again. Yet it was her voice that had opened the door to justice, her strength that had exposed the truth, and in doing so, had prevented these young men from fading back into the shadows, to strike again. As the legal process began, the courtrooms filled with faces, some familiar, some not. The community came to bear witness, to try and understand, to confront a reality that had shattered their sense of safety. Stephen and Christopher faced charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. The forensic trail, the confessions, the testimony, left little room for doubt. Still, the proceedings revealed even more, a glimpse into the depths of their pathology, the laughter they shared in retelling the crime, the pride taken in their so-called accomplishment, the utter lack of remorse, even as the full impact of their actions was laid bare. For the town, for the families, for all who listened, there was no closure in these words, only a deeper understanding of just how far and how easily darkness can grow when left unseen. And beneath it all, a single inescapable truth: some monsters are made, others are born. But once they step into the light, there is no going back. The sentencing came on a cold, overcast day. The kind where the sky hangs low, the air presses against your skin, and sound seems to travel slower. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense, but still. No voices rose above a whisper. The families of the victims sat in the front row, faces pale, hands folded tightly in their laps. Stephen Spader was led in first, shackled, dressed in a plain prison jumpsuit. His expression was unreadable, calm. No flicker of regret, no hint of shame. He sat, back straight, eyes drifting across the courtroom, as if none of it quite belonged to him. Christopher Gribble followed soon after. His gaze was different, sharper, calculating. He looked directly at the judge, at the jury, at the family of Kimberly and Jaimie Cates. His face remained composed, but beneath that surface, there was something else, a quiet satisfaction. When the verdict was read, there was no outburst, no reaction from the defendants, life without parole, for both of them. A sentence that matched the enormity of their crime. But for those who sat and listened, for those who had lived through this nightmare, there was no relief, no justice that could undo what had been done. In the weeks that followed, the details continued to haunt the community. The recordings of the interrogations were made public. The words, the tone, the chilling absence of humanity. Stephen laughing as he described the machete strikes. Christopher calmly recounting how he stabbed Jaimie, how she had pleaded, how he felt nothing. Forensic psychologists later reviewed the tapes. Their analyses were clear. Both young men exhibited profound antisocial traits, high degrees of narcissism, a complete lack of empathy. But there was a deeper layer. The fascination with the act itself, the pleasure in recounting it, in living it again through words. This is not common. Even among violent offenders, there is usually a trace of discomfort, a defense mechanism. But here, there was none. Only the echo of a fantasy fulfilled. And what of the others? Quinn Glover and Billy Marks. Their roles were less direct but no less disturbing. They had followed, watched, stood silent as the violence unfolded. Their sentences were lighter, but their guilt more complex. Were they victims of manipulation? Or did they simply lack the strength to resist? In the end, the answer matters little to those left behind. As the town of Mont Vernon struggled to move forward, one truth remained painfully clear. Evil had not come from the outside. It had grown from within, among their own. For those of us who study such cases, the lessons are stark. The signs were there. The escalating fantasies, the fascination with violence, the isolation. But in a society that often looks away, that assumes such darkness cannot touch their lives, these warnings are too easily missed. And when that darkness finally breaks free, when fantasy becomes action, the consequences are devastating. For Kimberly Cates, her life was stolen in an unspeakable moment of cruelty. For Jaimie, survival came at an unimaginable cost. The wounds she carries, both seen and unseen, will last a lifetime. And for the rest of us, the question lingers. How many others are out there, waiting, watching, dreaming? It is a question without an easy answer, one that demands vigilance and an unwillingness to turn away from the shadows we would rather not see.